Chris Thoreau here, and I am going to cover the assembly instructions for the air column separator that I built for Farm Folk City Folk. What I'm going to do is start with a general overview and then go over each section in a little more detail. Now, the general design is we have a backing of plywood. We're using 5/8 inch plywood, 2 plywood shelves, PVC tubes. We've got a variac for voltage control on our vacuum cleaner, which is not pictured. Here we've got our vibrating motor. We've got our seed chute and hopper here, and there's a power bar in the back there for power. We've got a dimmer switch here which controls how quickly the vibrating mechanism works. So it's a very simple design, so let's take a look at it in a little more detail. Let's start with our plywood backing here. The plywood is 40 inches wide by 50 inches tall. So in order to cut this, you'll want to cut this piece of your plywood off first, and then you can cut your 2 shelves from the section that is left here, and those shelves will go here. The shelves are 8 inches deep, and they're both the same size, and they are glued on, screwed in from the back, and then there's some brackets here to make them stable. So to do that, I just we marked our spacing there, put the glue on with 2 people, and once we screw it on, that basically holds it on for the glue, and that sticks really well. These just make it a little more durable. The glue holds really well, but this is going to get moved around, so we want to make sure it's nice and sturdy. From the top of the plywood to the top of the shelf is 8.5 inches, and from the top here to the top of this shelf is 36.25 inches. Now, before you actually fix your shelves onto here, you're going to want to cut your holes into here. The top shelf has 4 holes, the bottom shelf has 3. So 1, 2, 3 shelves in holes in both shelves, and this one has a 4th for this hopper, which is removable. So we have a diagram with this, but you're going to have specific spacing. So first thing I do with the shelf before it's attached, I draw my center line, so I know where I'm lining things up at. And then I'm spacing each of my holes here. So these 2 holes are 2.25 inches in diameter for our 2-inch pipe. And that may vary depending on what pipe you're using. This is a gas fitting pipe, so the outer diameter is 2.25 inches. So the 2.25 inch hole saw cuts these holes perfectly. This is exactly a 6-inch diameter hole for our 6-inch tube here. And this one for our hopper is 4.25 inches for our 4-inch PVC tube here. So spacing on these, check my notes here, very professional notes here. So we've got 2 inches to the center of this hole. So if you think about that, you've got your center line. You just find 2 inches, and that's where you drill the middle of your hole. Very easy with a hole saw. To here, middle of this one is 11 inches. The middle of this one is 26 inches. And this one is actually 3 inches from the outside on this side, or about 37.25 inches from here. So these measurements don't need to be precise, because you can adjust the cutting on your PVC. And each of these, I built 4, each of them was slightly different. Cutting PVC exactly to a distance is a little tricky just because it's round. Even with the miter saw, I found it was a little inaccurate. So this is not a precision design, so if you're off by a little bit, it's totally fine. And one of the things that makes this adjustable, I mean, you don't want to be off by an inch, is this actually rotates. And so if things are off a little bit, you can actually adjust it this way. So it's a nice little buffer we have there. For cutting the plywood, I'm using both a table saw and a skill saw, just whatever you find is easier or what you have available. And yeah, using a miter saw or a chop saw to do the PVC pipe. Okay, so we've got our backing and our 2 shelves. And now our shelves are cut and attached. I rounded the corners here as well just to make them a little less eye gougy. So now let's take a look at our PVC pieces. Back to my professional list here. So for our 2-inch pieces, if you were to buy a 10-inch or a 10-foot piece of PVC, of 2-inch PVC, it should be the perfect amount. So this piece here is 31.5 inches, and that accounts for it coming up right to the end here. And it's coming to about, it's a little bit above the shelf here. So what we have down, actually I'll come into this later. Here we have a 3-inch piece. Down here coming into the chamber here is a 6-inch piece. This here is a 24-inch piece. This is a 8.5-inch piece. This here is a 24-inch piece. We've got a 12-inch piece here, and then there's just about a little 2-inch piece in here. Now just a quick look at how the operation works. We attach our vacuum here. It creates suction, so it's creating suction pulling air this way. We're feeding the seed in here, and the suction is pulling things up. So the heavy seed is going to fall down here. The light seed and chaff is going to go up. The light seed, most of the light seed and chaff is going to end up here, and a tiny, tiny, tiny amount might end up going into here. This is nice because it allows us to capture any seed if we've turned up our vacuum too high. So just so you have a sense of why we're setting this all up like this. So you can pre-cut all your pieces. If you are a little worried about exact lengths, cut them a little bit long. But be careful because the 10-foot piece is almost exactly what you need. So again, if your measurements are very precise, you can double check things before you put everything together. And if you have to buy an extra PVC piece, it's not a big deal. But yeah. Okay, so we've got our shelves and we've got them attached. We've got our PVC pieces cut. Now let's talk a little bit about how this is held together, because what we want is it for it to be sturdy so it doesn't fall apart, but also so that it can be taken apart if we want to. I kind of do these in sections. So this piece here, this long piece, our 2 elbows on our intermediary piece and the piece here, I glue all that together and stick it in here. So it's kind of ready to go. Taking this PVC piece and this elbow and all this and gluing this together, and that's getting ready in there. And as I'm going through, I'm double checking my alignment all the time to make sure everything lines up. So there's a lot of double checking as I go. Again, it's not precision, but because it's not precision, we need to double check to keep things as close as possible. This stuff is all just put together, and then basically it gets tightened when you tighten these 2 gear clamps here to hold them together. Now the top of this also has a cap on it, so let's bring the camera a little closer here to take a look. So in order to get these pipes through here, we also need to drill 2 holes into this cap here. I'm using the same 2¼ inch hole saw that I used for our wood here, and I'm just centering those so there's a bit of space on each of the edges and a bit of space between them so there's room for these 2 elbows to go. This PVC tends to cut pretty easily with the hole saw, so it's a pretty easy cut to make. And then let's take a quick look underneath to take a look at the weather stripping. So here's the inside of our lid here. We've got our 2 holes, and you can see this weather stripping on the inside here. Just a simple band that goes all around, and I'll put a link somewhere so you can see the type that is. I tried a few different types of weather stripping, and this kind of rubber ridged style seemed to work the best. So that's what I would recommend. You can see the spacing on the holes there is fairly even as well. So you can see I've taken my pieces out here to give you a closer look. So here's this section. You see how all the pieces fit together. And again, on this section, these are all glued together. And then we've got this piece here, which is on the other side. All this is glued, but this piece is not. So this piece will come out if we want it to, but we don't need to do that. So you can see here, I can just put this all back together. Sliding our piece into here. Slides into the bottom there, we're in the top here. Doing the same thing here. to make sure this fits into here. One way to get PVC into it itself actually quite easily is to use a rubber mallet. So once this is sort of fitted, I just tap everything together like that. We'll line this all back up, and then we can put our cylinder back up here. So yeah, as I mentioned before, this is better as a two-person job, getting it to fit into the weather stripping for sure. There we go. And then once that's in, I can tighten my band down here to make sure it doesn't fall off. Put our cap back on the bottom. And then same thing here. Got that nice and lined up. And we can tighten this back up so this doesn't lift up, even though it's already in there pretty snug. When we hook up our vacuum to this hose at the bottom, I tighten that clamp so it's really firm around the vacuum. Now, it's okay if we lose a bit of suction because there's a lot of suction coming from the vacuum. The reason to have it nice and tight is so you have a consistent suction every time you use it. If it's tight sometimes and loose sometimes, your settings will be different for the same crop, and we don't really want that. Okay, so let's take a look at this section here, which I got just a little bit out of alignment. So here we've got a T-joint here, so our seed can feed in, and again, our heavy seed is going to fall down while the light stuff gets sucked up into our chamber here. We need to put a container down here to make sure it doesn't fall on the ground. Our connection here is just a 2-inch elbow. We have a 2-inch to 1.5-inch reducer, and then a 1.5-inch pipe leading from here into there. And it just sort of, the seed just slides down and then falls over the lip. This comes up to just a little 2-inch piece. And then we have a 2-inch to 4-inch reducer. And this one has a little adapter in here just to make this compatible with the 4-inch pipe I've got. And so this is basically the smallest version of the seed hopper, actually. So if I lift this up out of the way, if you're just doing small amounts of seed, this hopper and the space in here might actually be enough space for you to put the seed in, turn on the vibrating mechanism, and then have it go through there. So for some people, that's going to be sufficient. This big one here is if you have quite a lot of seed. This whole thing holds about, say, 10 pounds of brassica seed. And so if you want to just put it in there and have it go without having to worry about it, you can use this hopper. And then there's basically another smaller hopper here, which would just fit into there and give you, quite a few pounds that way. So this one actually just sits right above, so you can actually see the seed in here, so it actually doesn't touch. We don't want things touching this portion because this is the part that's vibrating. And so we need it to, as soon as we start touching things, that's going to dampen the vibration, and then our seed isn't going to move through there very well. So pretty simple attachments in here. For this one, again, it's a 4-inch to 2-inch reducer with the little adapter in there, 4-inch sewer pipe. And here I've actually got just 1/2 of a 4-inch coupling, a rubber coupling. And I found it was just holding a little better than the strap alone. And it actually has two sections like this. I just cut it in half, so I could use one of these couplings for 2 seed cleaners. And the cost of one of these split into 2 is basically about the same cost as a clamp on its own. And so yeah, I found the rubber was just holding that a little bit better. Let's now take a quick look down here at our cap here. So this 6-inch cap is the same size as the cap up on top. We don't use any weather stripping down here. We don't really need it, and we don't have to put any holes in it. So it's basically held on by a bungee, and you can see this little bungee is on a little eye hook there. Comes down and around, and then I just made like a little slit in here with the jigsaw with the hole, and then up into here. Now you could drill a bigger hole. I actually just kind of like the style of this. I know it actually seems kind of sloppy, but it's quite intentional because I wanted this hole to be small and I didn't want to have to fiddle with this and whatnot. So yeah, basically there's lots of ways you can do this. And on the cap itself, this is just up here, it's just held on with a screw. And on the cap itself, I did make some little ridges there. So the bungee would sort of catch on that, and that way it kind of stays nice and stable when it's on there. So it's a pretty simple mechanism. Definitely could be improved and done other ways, but this was very simple and very effective. And since we're already down here, let's move along. This here is our variac. So this, the vacuum cleaner plugs into this, and then we control the voltage of the vacuum cleaner with the variac, and that determines how much suction power we have. And so this allows us to fine-tune how much suction is drawing our chaff and light seed up this way. The more suction, the more is going to get drawn up. The less suction, the less is going to get drawn up. Very simple in that regard. This is just held on here with a piece of wire strapping. Quite simple. I bunched up the cord here, and then I've plugged it into a power bar here. And with the power bar, I just put a couple of screws into the base, slid the power bar on, then put a screw on either side to keep it from moving. Very simple, and it's in there nice and snug. Let's keep moving along here. So in here is our vibrating motor, which I take a look at in another video. There's a lot more detail that goes into that. I mean, it takes as much time to do the vibrating motor setup here as everything else. So that's sort of done on its own. Here we have a dimmer switch, which is used to control the vibrating motor. That determines how fast it spins, and consequently how quickly the seed goes through there. It's also plugged into the power bar there, and then obviously the power bar will get plugged into an outlet somewhere. And one last addition I was just finishing up is we have a little stopper here. So when we're filling up our hopper, we don't have seed pouring out, even though it doesn't tend to pour too much, but we don't want stuff sort of falling down below before we're ready. So this is just another piece of PVC cut that just sort of wedges in there. And it's attached to this bungee, mostly just because if it's not attached to something, it is going to go missing. So trying to keep things nice and so they're not going to get lost or damaged makes a big difference in the longevity of something like this. I actually use right up here, we've got a screw there, a screw there with this bungee, and that comes out, and we actually use it to hang this. So I just take this and slide it up underneath there, and it just gets held on by friction. So again, when this is moving in a vehicle, it doesn't get knocked around, and this other hopper just gets actually put right into that section there. So everything stays nice and close together and is less likely to get lost. Okay, so now that we've gone over everything, let's take a look at how things work. So I've got my vacuum now plugged into my variac, my voltage control here, and I always turn it down to start. So it's plugged in here. I've got my power bar plugged in, so I have power there, and I can test it very easily. Once my vacuum's on, I can start to control that. I'm just using a rigid wet dry vac here, which works really well. And then we can test our vibrating mechanism to make sure it's working as well. Okay, so I've got some seed here, which is fairly clean seed, but we're going to run it through, so you got to take a look at things. We'll do a shot from there, and then I'll bring you up here to take a look at things in here. So this is a brassica seed, a purple sprouting broccoli, that has gone through this machine many, many times by this point. I'm going to take this bigger hopper out for sample purposes. That is the official way of getting that out of there. And as I said, hang it up there so it's out of the way. And we'll use our smaller hopper on this one. So I can put a bit of my seed in here. And it's perfect. It's stopping right at the gate there. So I always start the vacuum first because I want to have my suction going, so I'm not pouring seed out and there's no suction, otherwise everything's going to come down there as it is. Now, I've cleaned the seed multiple times, so I'm going to do is turn this up quite high. I'm going to turn it up to about 100 volts, so you know, very close to its peak capacity, and then I'm going to turn the vacuum on, and then what I'll do is I'll turn on our vibrating mechanism, and the seed will start working through slowly. We'll see the seed coming out here, and we'll see some going into here, which will be our lighter seed, but very, very little, I think, in this case, because as I mentioned, the seed has been cleaned many times already. So let's take a look here. So, just doing a little pause here. So you could see the seed coming out there. And we've got just a little bit of seed in here. If you can even see that. So that's all that came out. So this is going to be the lightest seed in that whole thing. So I'll bring you up a little closer here to take a closer look at this. Okay, so we'll take a look here. I'll start the vacuum first and then get the vibrating mechanism going. We're at the end here, hopefully you can hear me okay. And the last little bit of seed can be a little tricky to get out. So what I do is I take my air compressor on a really, really low setting and just push that through, and it kind of just pushes that seed, the rest of the seed through that. So what I'll do, I'm going to take this hopper off. And then I'm just going to use the air compressor to flow through there. And this is a very low setting on the compressor. The compressor there is set to like lower than even it would be if you were to blow into that mechanism. So very light. So now we basically have our clean seed, and in this case just a little bit of what we'll call dirty seed or smaller seed. Again, you can see there's not much in there because I've already cleaned this many times, but this is exactly what I would expect. It's a seed that's been cleaned. This is going to be the lightest of that seed, maybe some contaminants, and this is going to be our clean seed down here with a little bit of sawdust in it. So overall you can see that it's a fairly simple machine. It's not too difficult to build at all. So the trickiest part of the whole thing is doing the vibrating motor unit. As I mentioned, I have a whole separate video on that maybe has already been edited in here, so you've seen it and you're like, what is he talking about? And yeah, just trying to get precision cuts, fitting things in well. Another thing I didn't mention, this is our only piece of clear tubing, and this is one of the most sort of expensive tubing pieces at about $80. And this is a 3-foot piece that was pre-cut. So I got it to the exact size that I wanted, so I wasn't trying to cut that and risking damaging it. The PVC is a lot easier to cut and a lot less expensive, and so if I make a mistake with it, which I made a few in the development process, it's not too expensive to get another piece, and I've been able to use the scrap pieces for other things, like I said, like this piece here. So you could probably assemble this the first time in a day. Maybe about 6 hours if everything makes sense to you and you have the tools. It's quite simple. As I mentioned, I used a table saw, a miter saw. For this I used my router, a drill, an angle grinder, our compressor, the rubber mallet, a few odds and ends. But so the more tools you have, the easier it is to assemble it and get things cut more precisely. So hopefully that gives you a good overview of how this goes together. what the materials look like. There's an accompanying materials list and some pictures that might be helpful as well. And if you need any further instruction, you can get in touch with me through Farm Folk City Folk. Okay, so here we're going to take a look at how I'm putting together the vibrating motor. So we have sort of our base piece here, which the motor is going to sit on, and then we're going to create some housing on the side. Once the housing is on, we'll use a couple of bolts with lock nuts and washers to put that on, and then we'll end up putting on this side our a collar on here and our offset screw, which is going to cause the vibrating motion. And then once this is done, we'll create a little box around that as well. So our base piece here, 10 inches by 4 inches. And then our side walls here are 6 inches by 4 inches. These are not precision measurements. This is just a size that seemed to work for what we were doing. You may want to modify this a little bit as well. So what I'm going to do actually to start this one off here is I'm going to put my motor on here, and I need to trace out the section that I'm going to cut out because we want the motor to nest in there so it can be bolted here. So we're kind of basically cutting away this portion and this portion here in order to get our housing attached. So what I'm kind of coming in and doing, I'm centering this in here, and then just kind of marking here and here, because these are kind of my outer edges there. And then on this side, kind of the same. It's just finding the point where that's square. So I kind of have this general square like this. But also, I'm going to need to cut around this. Just want to have that on here. Just making a little mark there. And a little mark there. And so, see, I'm not being super precise here because it actually does not matter too much. So that's the general thing I'm going to cut out here. So I'm going to do this in 2 stages. I'm going to drill 4 holes in here. Then I'm going to use the jigsaw to just cut the main section out. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean this up and finish it with the router. So here we go with our holes. Now we're going to do the next bit with the jigsaw. There we have our very basic form cut out. Now we are going to take it to the router to get that nice and smoothed out, and just so it fits the motor nice and snug. So here we are at the router table. This is a very small piece of wood that's quite thick, so be very, very careful when doing this on the router table, because if it catches, it can toss this. So just make sure you've got a good grip and you've got your safety gear on as well. So there, it looks like I've got the motor nice and flush to there. There's a few spots on this motor. There's some copper wire here that kind of gets caught, but it looks like I managed to catch all that. And then you can see this here is really tied up to the plastic bit. This bit's right because this is where our screw holes are, so we need to make sure there's a good amount in there. So this I'm making sure is pretty precise. The rest of this can be pretty loose, and I don't even mind having extra space up in here. It allows for a little bit of airflow and might even help with preventing it from overheating. So yeah, I'm sitting nice and flush there. So now what I can do, now I have to basically think about the other side here. And it's a little bit different on this side, but pretty similar. So I can see, yeah, this side's a little bit wider. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this as my template, trace my other one out on here, and then I'll just change the other one to get it a little wider where it needs to be. My basic template is traced. Now I'm going to do the holes in the jigsaw, and then I'll come back here to the router. Okay, now we're going to router our next piece. Okay, so it looks like we've got that pretty good. That nested in there on both sides really well. Now what we're going to do is we're going to find our screw points and get our 2 screws through there. Okay, now to set this up, I am going to mark this O for outside, O for outside there, so I remember which is which. Then I'm going to take this top one off. Pop this into there. Hold this tight. Give that a little bump. Give that a little bump. And now I've marked my 2 holes that I'm going to drill for the screw. Okay, so I've got a drill bit that matches my screw size. I believe this is a 1/8 bit. Get that nice in there. Motor can go back in, and then the screws can come through the other side. Oh yes, I need a slightly bigger bit, so I can screw these through, but because I might have to take this in and out, I do want to have that so it's just a tiny little bit bigger than the screw. So I'm just going to do that quickly. Okay, so it fits through there nice. So now, that's our outside, just making sure we're staying on top of that. Pop that back in. Oh, sorry, this way. It's going to go through there. The screw goes through there. So screws go through there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually push these back out so they're just flush with the end. There we go. Got this lined up again, so I've got my outside on the outside, making sure that all still fits good. Okay, so I need to make sure these are lined up. Okay. No. So these are nice and lined up. I'm going to go like this. I've got my screw marks in there. Do our holes on that side. Okay, so I do see my holes are lined up there. Now what I'm actually going to do, I need to take these off, so I put my washers in there. A little bit of splitting in the plywood there, but I think that'll be okay. A washer on the outside here. Washer here. Lock washer. Oh, actually, sorry, I like to do the lock washer first, and then the flat washer. Same thing on this one. Lock washer, flat washer. I'm going to do another lock washer, and then our nut. Now you might want to use nylon nuts here. I actually could not get any in this size, so supply chain issues are still affecting what's available for some of the stuff on this build. So this is why I'm also using lock washers on both sides. Okay, so now we have our basic mounting here done. 2 bolts going through with washers and lock washers on both sides, and now I'll just tighten that up, and then this will be ready to mount to our base. So here we're just going to take a look at how this is going to be mounted on here to get a sense of our positioning. Make sure this is aligned. So our motor is basically going to hold a seed chute here, so it's going to be lined up with the middle here. So this middle is going to line up there. We have a line drawn on our board here, so that's going to allow us to line that up. And this is going to be floating on some rubber grommets. And so in positioning this, I'm just basically making sure I'm leaving a gap here. There's a bit of space here. And this is, you know, about 1/2 inch or so away from here. So that just gives me a sense of what my position is going to be when I go to mount this. So our casing here is lined with the back here, so it's aligned there. And the reason being, this is going to be our spinning vibrating mechanism here, and we're going to build a little box around here so nobody sticks their finger in there. So we're just lining stuff up in the back, and then just making a couple little marks there as guides. And then we can screw that on. Now when we're positioning our motor on here, one thing to keep in mind is our seeds are traveling this way. So our motor will be rotating in a clockwise position. So just think about the direction of the motor when it's at the top is going to be going this way. And so that's the direction we need to mount our motor, because that's the direction it is going to push the seed. Okay, so I've got my marks there. What I should just do is flip this over. Made some marks on the outside, so this will align. Okay, so now I've got my position there. And I'm using just 1.5 inch decking screws here. Okay, so now our basic motor mount is done. We will build this casing afterwards, but we don't need that for the next part. Now we're going to get this positioned in on our frame. And one of the things, what we're going to do next is be building basically a float, what I'm calling for this. So we're going to have a bolt on top with a washer on it in each of these corners. That's going to sit like so. We're going to then have a rubber grommet. Then we're going to place it onto our base, and then we're going to put a nylon nut on the bottom. And when we tighten the nylon nut, this will still be movable. And so we're not tightening this to affix it, we're tightening it just to keep it in position. So this will have a bit of room to float, and that's basically what's going to help its vibrating. There's a few different ways you can do this. This seems to give the most consistent vibration and a good high level. So that's how we'll do. So each of these corners is going to have that exact same setup. So what we're going to do now is take this to our shelf on the seed cleaner, position it. We're going to drill our holes through so it's ready to go, and then it's ready to be mounted. Now there's a couple things we're going to need to do, and one is we're going to need to position our seed hopper on the top here. We're going to use a strap to hold it on, and what we want to do is we want to attach that strap on the back here so it's coming over to the front. That way, once this is on, we don't have to move it again. So this will be in position. This strap will be ready to hold the hopper on, like so, and then it'll be ready to go. So we just want to make sure we do that stuff ahead of time so we don't have to remove this to do that, which in the sort of design, I've had to end up removing this multiple times just to get positioning right. So just going to make that a little bit easier. All right, so now I'm bringing my mounted motor back here. And I have made some marks for the center, so I can kind of line this up with the marks that are here. On there, and then what we're just going to do is take this and clamp it here so it's generally in position. We need to be a little closer, like I talked about earlier. So I'm checking my alignment with the line here based on some marks I made here. And then I'm just going to do a visual check here as well. Looks really good. I find as much effort as I make, my measurements are not always precise. And I find with this unit, the precision actually doesn't matter that much, except here. Because when the hopper is on here, it's going to feed into here, but we don't want it touching here because that's going to dampen the vibrations. Okay, so I've got this on here. I like the position. Nice and aligned here. So we're going to drill our hole here. Pop that in there to hold that. And then do our other holes here. So now we've got our holes there, we're ready to mount our motor onto here, and again, we just want to make sure we put this strap on the back before we do that. So to get our alignment here, so we can put our strap on, what we do is we put in our hopper tube here, so this is where we're going to put our seed, and we're lining this up so it's nice and parallel here with the edge. We've got this in place, and then double checking, and then I'm just going to mark the middle of that there, and then what I'll do is I'll measure from here to here and make the same mark on the other side. So this tells me where the middle of the strap is going to be, so I'm going to affix it down at the bottom here, and then we can attach this. I'll bring it around and affix it down to the bottom here. So here I've attached my strapping to the back of the vibrating motor mechanism. I do it into the plywood here. You could do it here, but whatever. And so now this is ready to take it's going to come across here. That's what's going to hold that on. And then what I like to do is I'm going to actually put this into the bottom here. So it's going to go in here below the motor. And then if I feel it needs to be a little tighter, what I'll do is I'll put a second screw up top here. And that one I can loosen or tighten to make this tighter or looser. If this is too tight, it actually dampens the vibrating motor. So I try to fine tune that to get it just right, so we've got a good amount of vibration. So now that we know that that's ready to go, we can put mount our motor onto the shelf. Okay, so we're getting ready to mount our motor on here. I think hopefully we can do it. Actually, we're going to take this one off here just to give ourselves a little bit of extra room to work with. I've got my bolts with a washer there. I've got my rubber grommets there, and let's see if I can line this up. Make this easy. Oh, first time that's worked. Lovely that I got it on film. And then, so on the bottom again, this is a floating mechanism. So I'm using nylon nuts on the bottom. So when I put this in, I'll do this by hand to start. And when I tighten them, we're not securing this super tight to the shelf. Once it's there, we want to make sure, as I was saying before, these bolts can still rotate. So basically this is just keeping this in place and allows this mechanism to kind of basically bounce around a little bit to allow the vibrating to work. It doesn't bounce around a lot, so just tighten these up. So later what I'm going to do once I test the mechanism is just make sure that that things still vibrate. Sometimes if these are too tight or too loose, it doesn't quite work, so we'll adjust that once everything's all put together. So now what we're going to do, that it's on here nice and secure, we're going to put our offset arm onto here, which is going to make it vibrate. As it is now, this is just going to spin because it's a fan motor, but now to make it vibrate, we're going to put an offset on there. Okay, so we're getting ready to put our offset on here. There's basically 4 components. There's our shaft collar here, which is going to go on like so. And the size of the collar you use is going to depend on the shaft you end up with. I have a 1-inch screw. This is an 832 screw, which will go into there. But before that, I have 4 nuts that are going to go onto here. So we're going to have this offset, this screw with some weight on it, which is going to cause our vibrating. And in order to keep things assembled, we're going to use some thread lock on there. So basically, I'll just pop this stuff on. So we'll put the 4 screws on first, of course, or the nuts, sorry. There's our first one. I put a tiny little bit of thread lock on before each one. Now again, this is something I might use some nylon nuts for, but just locally there doesn't seem to be any right now. So this seems to be working quite fine. This is the 3rd one of these I've built at this point, and they seem to be holding up really, really well, even with long periods of vibration. So. I have my last one on there. Just going to tighten this up here using my drill. Okay, so I've got those on nice and tight. Now, I'm going to put our collar on. And some more thread lock. That's on there. And I am putting the collar just in a little bit. And there we go. So that should be on there nice and tight. When that sets, that's not going to go anywhere. And so as this spins, this is going to give us our vibration. Obviously, we'll get this hooked up to electricity in order to test that. All right, so there's a couple more components here. So in order to control the on-off and the speed of the motor here, what we're going to do is we're going to put in a dimmer switch, which I've just started wiring here. So we have a dimmer switch that is going to sit here, keeps it out of the way of the hopper there and makes it easy and everything nice and close. The dimmer switch is going to itself plug into a power bar that's going to sit here, and this will be wired in here. So this is how we're going to control this. So I'm going to get this mounted on here. And again, your wiring will depend on your motor and everything here. Some people might like to put in an outlet here, but I ended up just using a power bar. So I'm doing less wiring, and then this power bar could be used for other things to be plugged into as well. So I'm not going to review the wiring in detail because I am not an electrician. I have followed the directions on the dimmer package, and I hope you will be doing the same. Okay, so I've got things wired up here, and before I put my dimmer in, I'm just going to give it a quick check to see if we're working. We're looking good, and the other thing I'm checking is to make sure that my motor is spinning in a clockwise motion, because this is the way the seat is going to go, so this is the way it needs to spin. So now I'll get this hooked up and we can get ready to attach the hopper feed here. Okay, then with my hopper feeder here, so this here is movable. Doesn't need to be down here, but this is just sort of getting a sense of the position. Here we're just looking at having this lined up here. And then again, we're going to drill down here into the bottom. And this will tighten up a little bit as we go. Get you out of the way. Okay, so first thing I'm going to actually do is cut off my excess here. So I've got my amount measured, and so this is the point I'm going to cut that off just to make sure I've got it all good. one of the things to consider here when you're screwing in is there is the motor here, so I already know from looking I've got some space here. You don't want to go too high because then you're going to hit the motor there below. So that's tightened up nice. Still rotates. So that's more perpendicular here. I'm sitting at a bit of an angle here, so this is good here. So this hopper here is actually floating. So when this is up and straight, this sits right on top here, and it kind of rotate a little bit just to get it nice and centered. I've not got this adjusted yet, so it's just going to sit on top there. And the reason we don't want this hopper coming right into here is it actually tends to dampen the vibration, and we don't want that. So we've got this attached here. Again, as I said, I can make it a little tighter by putting a screw in here, which I might do, and then what I can do is I can loosen that screw a little bit if I need to. So that's just to make sure this is nice and secure, doesn't vibrate its way off, but have not had that issue at all yet. So. Okay, so now we've got that nice and secure, and we're going to now we're going to start working on our feed here. So what we're going to have here is we're going from 2 inch to 1.5 inch. This is the chute that the seed is going to come down, and basically we're going to cut this open a little bit so we can see the seed, and it's going to sit in there like that. So this is basically going to be our mechanism to feed the seed in. And as the seed goes through, it's going to fall into our column of air. The big seed is going to fall, the light seed, and the chaff is going to go up. So that's the general system here. This is a little bit of, ends up being a little fine tuning in here, but usually ends up working out pretty good. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at how we are cutting this piece. So what I like to start with doing is marking point here. So I'm going to cut this piece, and this tells me basically how much of this is going to sit in here, and I want to make sure I kind of only cut to here. So this gives me keeps it more stable here, and then gives me a little bit of a window to see the seed. This section I actually have not been gluing while the rest of this is glued, and part of that is because this is a section that may get taken apart and cleaned more, which means you could come in here and take this whole thing apart and say dip it in bleach and give it a good drying. And this design is sort of the newest part of this whole setup. So if we end up changing this design, we'll be able to use these parts again. And if we glue them, it's all one piece. And so far, the vibrating is not vibrating things apart. So it's actually working quite well. Okay, so again, what we are going to do with our piece here is we're basically cutting an opening here, which is just going to allow us to be able to see the seed as it goes through. So I'm going to do this using 2 tools. I'm going to start off on the table saw, and what I'm basically going to do is just cut a little piece like this. So I'm going to have a little opening here, and then the cuts that I do here I'm actually going to do with the angle grinder. So this just gives me a nice cut. I've got my blade set at 3/8 of an inch in height, so it's very just coming up a little bit. And then I'll finish it off on the angle grinder, which works pretty well. Okay, and you need to be very careful doing this cut. Set here. And here I've actually got this set at 1.5 inches. So even though I have my mark on here, it's going to come out a little further than my mark. So you can see, very simple cut there. So now I can bring in the angle grinder. Actually kind of use this here. And use this as a bit of a guide. What I'll do is just come in here with this, actually. Let's give myself a nice line to cut on. thing here. Again, not looking at a super amount of precision here, but you know, this is going to be a high profile thing, so we want to try to have a pretty straight cut if we can. So there's our basic opening there. I'm just going to trim this up a little bit to get it nicer. But again, so this just allows us to see the seed as it's coming through the chute there. Out of the way. So this is, yeah, the little bit of stuff here. I'll just trim that up nice and easy. So I wouldn't say that's my best work, but I can get in there with the file and just clean that up a little bit as well. So now we've got our chute ready to go. Okay, so here we do a little bit of sort of fine tuning of things to get it all set in. So I'm going to make sure this tube, this top tube, is set in where it should be. And here I like to use my mallet to make sure stuff is totally in. Then, actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop this into here. No, it's over here. Okay. And then just sort of come in, yeah, just to take a look here. And then our bottom piece. Because what happens is I find sometimes I need to trim a little bit more off that top tube. So what I'm looking for here is this should not be actually touching this because this is 1.5 inches and this is 2 inch. There's enough space that it can sit right in there without touching the tube. And then the other thing I'm checking is its length. And I think getting that in there. Oh, I think my length looks pretty good actually. So there is some adjusting here. My tube here is a bit of an angle. Pretty close. I'd say maybe I've cut this chute a little too long. So what I'm going to do, yeah, I'm going to take this off. I'm going to just cut it a little bit shorter. And then when I put it back in, I'm going to make sure I put it in straight. Okay, so ready to try this again. This original piece was 6 inches. I've actually cut it down to 5.5. So let's get you, see if we can do it this way. This I'm also making sure this curved piece is facing downwards here. Makes for just a nice smooth chute for the seed to go down. And then getting all this hooked up again. Now one thing I'm looking for up at the top here, I'll just sort of scan up, is when this is all set, I need to make sure that this is still perpendicular or parallel to the top here. So I'm always keeping an eye on that, just to make sure I don't sort of end up adjusting stuff and then that ends up being off. I don't think it'll affect the flow or anything. I actually think just aesthetically it'll look silly if it's at a little bit of an angle. And so here, can I get this in? Okay, so this is set and this is set, and then looking here, so I can see here that this is actually just touching the top of this slightly. And I've got this pushed in, it's not going any further. So what I need to do is I need to come in here and I'm going to cut maybe 1/8 of an inch. Maybe 1/8 of an inch. I'm just going to trim that a little bit. I mean, I could lift this a bit. I mean, if we look at this. And that still remains pretty parallel aesthetically. And if you remember, there is a little a stopper up at the top of that, so that allows me to control this. Once it's set, it'll actually stay where it is. But I'm going to do, yeah, I think I'm going to give it a little trim. I want to keep that nice and parallel at the top. Okay, so let's try that after our cut there. Place that back in. Get this attached to the top. And then get that. Make sure that fits nice there. Get this in here. Make sure those fit nice there. And this looks like it's floating in there really nicely. So let me try and bring you around here so you can see this. So it's a little tough to see, but I'm trying to make sure I can see there's a little gap at the bottom there, which is nice, and the sides aren't touching. So this is actually just kind of floating here. And so that's going to make sure if it starts touching this, two things are going to happen. One, this is going to dampen the vibration, and two, it actually is quite loud. So I do find every once in a while as I'm setting things up, I need to adjust this a little bit and make sure it's exactly straight. So looking pretty good. So this ends up being a 5.5 inch piece, and you can kind of see that the chute goes over the lip, so the seed will fall into there and not get caught, and then sort of, we don't want the seed sort of getting caught and then coming back through here backwards. So looking pretty good. We're almost ready to give this a test run. Okay, so it's now time to test our vibrating mechanism. So here's our little seed chute that we did, our opening there where we can see the seed coming through. The piece I cut out of there, I just used as a little stopper there. Everything is secured, and you can see I've got the hopper in place. And just to give you a quick look at that. So again, this is a floating hopper. When the seed comes down, it won't overflow here. So this allows us to see the seed level here once it's gone down from the top. Up top, it's just held on by a piece of rubber coupling. And what we're just testing here now is to make sure everything's secure and that when we put seed through the machine, it actually works its way through here. So what often happens with this design is the vibration mechanism doesn't vibrate quite as expected. And sometimes that's just a matter of lightening and tightening things properly. So this is the point at which I'm now testing it and just making sure that the seed goes through and falls into our chute. So put some seed into our hopper here. You can see our stopper there isn't perfect. I'll just work on something a little better for that as we go, but just a little bit of seed comes through, so it's generally not an issue. This is some winter broccoli seed that has gone through this cleaner many, many times already. Okay, so you can see the seed levels here. I've got even more in here, and this is ready to go. So now I'm just basically testing. I don't have a vacuum on here. I'm not testing suction. I'll do that when I'm ready to test everything. So now we're just going to test how things are. So we get our motor going. And again, I'll end up building a cover over this, but I don't want to put anything on there while I'm testing, just to make sure everything's okay. And then couldn't ask for a better result than that, to be honest. So you can see we can control the vibration here to control our feed rate, and slowing the rate down will give us a little more, just a little more precision. So it's pretty good. Our seed is moving through there really well, which is what we want. And at that rate, we could probably do 40 or 50 pounds an hour through this machine, or even more. So it's a pretty good rate. And I can see as I do different things, it can speed up the rate. So what I might do is tighten a few things up to see if I can get the rate up a little higher. And this is at my maximum again. And I don't usually have it at that point. And as the seed lowers down, we often get a lower rate of movement anyways. Put a bit more seed in there, see how it goes. So that's a very, very good rate that we're getting there. So I'm very happy with that. I'll pour one more cup in there just so, and then bring the camera up close so folks can see. So I've been one of the better rates I've gotten. So I can see our design is improving. So it looks like this vibrating motor is ready to go. Now all I need to do is one test run with the suction, and this machine, I would say, is done, other than again just having to build the cover over the vibrating motor there. And that can change the vibration rate, so I'll do another test run once it's on. Okay, so now you can see I've built a very, very simple little box around here. I mean, not super precise. I actually leave a little bit of space on the edges here and through here. Just for a bit of airflow. I don't want to, just thinking that the engine could heat up, so it gives a little bit of airflow to prevent it from overheating. And then we'll pop some more seed in here, see how it's looking. And we've still got a very, very, very good flow rate. So seed is moving through there really well. I did make a few adjustments as we were going. And you can kind of see, you can just press different places and see what happens. And that gives you a sense of where you can tighten things up. So this one is ready to go. Now we can try it with the vacuum. Okay, so now we're ready here for a full test run. Just as an overview, my vacuum is hooked up here, which is going to create suction, sucking the light material into here. When we turn on our vibrating feeder, the good seed is going to fall and the light stuff is going to come up into here. Our vacuum is plugged into a variac, so this is going to reduce, control the voltage, and that's how we control the flow coming from the vacuum. And so let's give it a try, and I always start by turning this on, and I already have a good sense of the amount of suction of the seed that I've started working with, but usually I would start low and then work my way up until I see chaff or even a little bit of seed coming into here. So I know when there's just a little bit of seed coming into here, that's my lightest seed, and I probably want to get rid of it anyways. And that's a good place to start. So let's take a look. Suction's going. See how it goes. So, very little material going in there as I expected, because this is very clean seed. But I'll turn it up. Still pretty little, so I'll turn it up, which means it might get a little harder to hear me. So now we can see some seed in there, and this is a good way to actually grade our seed. Take the lighter stuff out, and we can go even higher here. So let's take a look through that. So I've turned it up quite high to get more of that seed. And what I'm always doing is comparing how much seed is going here versus how much seed is going here. And if here is about 10 to 15% of what's going here, that's perfect. It means I'm losing 10 to 15% of my lightest seed, and that's fine by me. So there we basically have a pretty successful test run. Our vibrating mechanism is working as expected. We've got a good flow rate with the seed. We've tested our everything here. So we can unhook this. I've got a bit of seed that's coming here, and I can see that smaller seed and a little bit of chaff. It's exactly what we want, but as a percentage of the seed that I put in, that's very little. And that's exactly what we're looking for. So we are good to go. This machine is now ready to use.